Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragon's Jewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan. And I'm just going to get all those wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so. It's just down below. And if you like the content, please make sure you're hitting the like button on the videos. And of course, if you want to share some love down in the comments below, it's always greatly appreciated. And I absolutely love reading them. I do my best to make sure that I respond back and share some love in your direction as well, because naturally without you, this channel wouldn't exist. And I appreciate each and every one of you. And I thought I would bring some of those Halloween spooky vibes to the channel. There are going to be in the WIP and Chat style format, but I'm going to read some ghost stories of Alberta, which is the province that I reside in. So I will have a spooky canvas that I'll be working on, and then I'm going to read a couple of ghost stories so that you can listen along while you dab and paint, or work on another craft, or what you normally do during WIP and Chats kind of thing, and I keep you company with some spooky tales from my province. So I figured that would be fun. Poltie Did It. It is a well-documented fact that several people watching the same event will report the occurrence very differently. People who have stood together and watched a person commit a crime will give totally different descriptions of the criminal. Surprisingly, this ghost story contradicts that peculiarity of human nature, which makes the tale even more intriguing. The story of the haunting has been told to me 4 different times by 4 very different people, one of whom lives more than 1,000 kilometers away, and yet it is the similarities in their stories rather than the differences that are notable. The story in question revolves around a radio station in Edmonton. Despite the well-accepted existence of the station's ghost, management's official stance is to deny any knowledge of such a phenomenon, and so sadly the station will not be identified, and any personal names used are fictitious. A radio station haunting isn't too surprising, considering that visiting spirits are often attracted to sources of electrical or electronic energy. Given this taste for electricity, a venue emitting 100,000 watts of power must provide a spiritual smorgasbord for the ghost. Stories of this haunting date back nearly 15 years and continue to this day. When one former employee of the station began working there in the early 1980s, she found people had a ready excuse for everything from malfunctioning equipment to missing office supplies. Poltie did it, she was told. Although she never had a personal experience with the ghost, she made a point of collecting first-hand accounts from colleagues who had. For those of us not familiar with the inner workings of a radio station, my informant explained how it's not unusual to see unfamiliar faces around the station. There are always people coming and going. Still, employees always knew when the stranger in the hall was the ghost and not merely an unfamiliar advertising client. The ghost appeared only either very late in the evening or in the wee hours of the morning. Their second and no doubt more convincing clue about the visitor's identity was that although the ghost was easily visible, closer assessment revealed that he existed only from the knees up. The ghost is that of a young man, possibly of native Canadian descent. He wears a dark bomber-style jacket of denim or leather, and appearances at the station inevitably coincide with a near epidemic of irritatingly misplaced items. Pens, logbooks, tape cartridges would go missing from the control room, only to show up exactly where they had been left and searched for in the first place. While the spirit's favorite spot was clearly the control room,
He also enjoyed visiting the newsroom, the music library, and the announcer's lounge. Staff members routinely reported walking through cold spots in these rooms, and occasionally even declared that they had seen the apparition. An announcer who had left the lounge for a few minutes returned to see his coffee cup, still full of steaming brew, sitting suspended in mid-air. The cup stayed there, defying all natural laws, until the man reached out to grasp it. Then it fell to the floor. One of the station's writers, who was experiencing some difficulties in his personal life, often spent his off hours at work visiting with the announcers. One particular night, he was perched on a stool close to the console when a sudden force sent him flying off backward up against the wall. This clearly malevolent display was enough to make the staff members who had seen the ghost join forces and take action. One of the newscasters had a friend with psychic talents in Ontario. Late one evening, the half-dozen people who had seen or felt Poltie met in the largest studio and used the speakerphone to make a prearranged call to the out-of-province sensitive. Following introductions and a thorough explanation of the situation, the psychic made a few comments, beginning with the theory of a spirit's attraction to electricity. Then, to everyone's amazement, he accurately described the entity they had all been seeing. Later, when the psychic spoke privately to his friend from the newsroom, he revealed that describing the apparition had been a simple matter, as he had been mentally tuned to the people on the other end of the phone, and the ghost had been right there with them. More disturbingly still was the psychic's description of the violent incident involving the writer being thrown off the stool. The attack, the psychic determined, had been an attempted possession. Apparently, the writer's personal problems had made him weak and therefore vulnerable to such attack. As any friend would, the man reported these details to the troubled writer, whose response was swift and sure. The writer left the very next day on an unplanned but much-needed vacation. Another instance occurred when an off-duty announcer returned to the station to put away the equipment he had with him while supplying the music at a local dance. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, one of Poltie's favorite times. Dave was carrying equipment down a hallway past the music director's office. The lights in the office were turned off, as he expected they would be. But from behind the closed door, he would clearly hear desk drawers being opened and closed. Understandably unnerved, he reported this odd state of affairs to Tony in the control room. As he spoke, a gust of extremely cold wind blew through the control room, which had neither a door nor a window open. Second later, the writer before him, Dave, was thrown from his chair and hurled against a wall. The terrified pair retreated to Dave's truck and returned to the building only when records needed to be changed. After a few trips in and out, the man began to feel a little foolish, and deciding the incidents must all have a rational explanation, returned to the building. They checked the music director's office first to see why Dave had heard desk drawers being slammed. Nothing in the small room seemed out of place, until a coffee cup rose from the desk, sat suspended for a minute in mid-air, then traveled over to where they stood and dropped on the carpet at their feet. Suddenly the pair once again saw the wisdom of their decision to sit in the truck between record changes. Unfortunately, the spirit's strength was increasing with each antic. This time, as soon as they re-entered the building, all the power went out. Now they really had to do something. A radio station that isn't broadcasting isn't accomplishing anything for anyone. They called the station's engineer and waited outside for him to arrive. Perhaps Dave and Tony had intended to explain the night's goings-on to the engineer, but he arrived still groggy from his disturbed sleep and not in very good humor. That less than positive mood did not improve when the engineer located the source of the problem. The main breaker switch on the electrical panel had been moved to the off position. He flipped the switch back on to the on position where it belonged, and of course, once again, everything in the station worked as it should have. By this time, the early morning staff had begun to arrive. Jeff, the disc jockey, and Paula, the newscaster, set about their familiar routine in separate rooms, adjoined by a plate glass window. Just before the first news broadcast, Paula watched Jeff whirl around in his chair and stare at the door to his announcing booth. "There's somebody in here," he exclaimed. "While you do the news, I'm going to look around." Jeff was back moments later, and he reported that he hadn't found anything out of the ordinary. This surprised him. He said because he felt someone staring at him, and when he turned to identify the source of the creepy feeling, he had seen a very tall figure in what looked like a bomber-style jacket. The on-air duo were uncharacteristically jumpy for the balance of their shift, and they felt cold breezes brushing by every once in a while, even though they remained in separate, closed-off rooms. They were both relieved when they saw their counterparts for the next show arrive. Jeff told the other announcer that something weird is going on, but didn't mention the cold air or seeing the image. "Funny you should mention that," the second announcer replied. "I had a strange experience here just last week." He then proceeded to describe seeing the figure that Jeff had noticed. Word then spread, and a badly shaken staff met on Monday morning to compare stories. Many people had seen the same image, but fearing for their jobs, no one had shared the information with each other. Apparently, Poltie had even made himself known to at least one non-employee. A disc jockey explained that his girlfriend, who frequently used to visit him at work, will no longer come near the place. She was sitting in the music director's office one day, waiting for me to finish. The zipper on her purse opened and then closed again, on its own, as she stared in horrified amazement. Not everyone was that susceptible. An announcer, obviously devoid of any love of mystery, unwrapped a brand new reel-to-reel audio tape. It should, of course, have been blank, but when the man wound it up on the machine and pressed play, to advance it a little, the tape emitted strange, garbled noises. Curious, he changed the speed of the tape, but again he heard the same sounds. Not the same sounds at a different speed, but exactly the same sounds. He turned the tape over, wound it up backwards, and pressed the play button again. The sounds were still there, and they were still the same. It didn't sound backwards or different or sped up or slowed down. No matter what he did to the tape, it played the same nonsensical combination of syllables and sounds. To the dismay of the ghost hunters everywhere, this man had not an ounce of curiosity in his body. He simply bulk erased the mysterious tape and continued on with his work as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. One theory about the haunting of this Edmonton-based radio station states that the ghost is the spirit of the young man killed in a motor vehicle accident. The station he's chosen to spend his eternity in is said to have been his favorite during his few years of life. The harmless attention-getting pranks he plays seems adolescent enough to support such a possibility. In the meantime, it's safe bet that the radio station staff occasionally credit Poltie with mysteries that their own absent-mindedness has actually caused. If they do, it seems to be alright with Poltie. By now he must be used to being the station's scapegoat. The Enchanted Cottage. In order to protect the current owner's real estate investment, the people who shared the story with me have asked only to be identified by the Snodemans Sam and Sue. The property where this ghost story took place is an unusual one and therefore easily recognized, so I have accepted their request with understanding. The couple's haunted home was situated in central Calgary, on the same property as a considerably larger residence that it was associated with a religious organization. The cottage was also very haunted, but even without its ghost, Sam explained it was a special place. In many ways, it was an enchanted cottage. Sam explained, adding that he had already lived there for some time before he and Sue married, and it was during those first few years that Sam's father agreed to let Sam take his piano from the family home in Bowden to his new home, the Calgary Cottage. Sam's parents had bought the used piano directly from the manufacturer in 1948, the year he was born. They hoped their son would grow up playing and enjoying the instrument. Their wish came true. Sam became an accomplished pianist. When he left home, however, Sam's father was somewhat hesitant to let the young man take the lovely old Heintzman with him to Calgary. Perhaps it was the older man's way of keeping a little piece of his son at home. Eventually, however, Sam's father relented. I finally convinced my dad to let me have the piano. This was quite exciting, and the day it arrived, one of the women who lived in the larger residence on the property came over to see it. She stopped cold in her tracks. "That's my piano," she said. The woman explained that as a young woman, she had been something of a pianist. In 1947, when it became apparent that her life was going to head in another direction, she had sold her beloved piano back to the manufacturer Heintzman. "It was the one possession I regretted giving up, and now God's brought it right back to me," she told Sam, with utter amazement. From that day on, the two shared the old Heintzman and its new enchanted home. While that arrangement pleased both Sam and the neighbor, the piano was not nearly as well received by the resident ghost. "One night I really ticked her off," Sam told me. He then described one night when he came home from work late and decided to practice for a while. I was playing a Rachmaninoff piece. It was really tricky. In order to master the composition, Sam had been going over and over a few bars. By 4 a.m., the spirit had apparently had enough. I heard her coming downstairs and she slammed the door. Sam remembered I told her, "I'm sorry, but I've got to get this piece right." Oddly, in the 4 years, the ghost never appeared to Sam, although she did to some other people. He did, however, become well acquainted with her routine, and after a few months he realized that every second Wednesday evening she would visit the larger house next door. This was the ghost's turn to disturb Sam's sleep. I'd be in bed around midnight and I'd hear the doors open and close and hear her coming up the stairs. The first time these noises occurred, Sam responded by arming himself with a baseball bat, and when nothing appeared, he realized it was just his resident ghost. After that, he knew to expect the late-night noises every other Wednesday. We had our positives. We'd lived fairly happily together, Sam said, referring to his invisible roommate. One of these positives was that an unexpected serenade during a dinner party Sam was giving. As he was preparing the meal and chatting with his guests, the little group began to hear a violin being played downstairs. I went beetling downstairs, but there was no one there, and the music stopped. I went back upstairs, and it started again. Next, he got the guests involved in attempting to solve the musical mystery. We all went downstairs. It was minus 25 or 30 degrees outside. We split up and checked all around outside, but there was nobody out there. Despite the search, the group was serenaded by phantom violin music throughout dinner. Sam and Sue began their married life living in the haunted house. Sam worked nights and wanted to be sure his new bride would be safe at home in his absence, so he and his father set about reinforcing locks and securing windows. As is often the case in haunted buildings, the renovation caused the spirit's activity level to increase dramatically. She took the changes as a real challenge. The ghost's most spectacular stunt, however, was still to come. And when it did, it led Sam to find of a lifetime. I was sitting watching television when I heard a gunshot. It went right past my ear. I crept over to the window and crawled around trying to investigate. Although the area around the house appeared to be deserted, Sam went out into the yard to investigate further. There was no one there, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't find evidence that anyone had even been on the property recently. He went back inside and decided instead to search for proof that the shot had actually occurred. Carefully following the path that a bullet would have taken after whizzing right past his right ear, Sam found himself at a far wall. Because the second story of the house was under the gable, there had been a false wall installed some years before. Although he couldn't see any bullet hole, he decided to open the door. He discovered in the false wall to see if he could find the spent cartridge there. He didn't. He did, however, find a violin. I went racing over to show the woman in the larger house. They said I was welcome to keep it, so I showed it to a friend of mine. The violin had been made in 1721, and according to her, it was a good one, well worth fixing up. I think the gunshot that I was investigating might have been the ghost's way of showing me that the violin was there. After a number of years of living in the unique and very haunted house, Sam and Sue moved on, but neither of them has ever forgotten their experience in the Enchanted Cottage. Stevie stays at Hillhurst School. School custodians often keep logbooks in which they record the day's events. These journals usually contain references to matters such as weather conditions, which mechanical systems were operating during the day, and under what conditions. Any problems encountered with any of the school's electrical systems, and similar sorts of issues. Hillhurst School in Calgary is somewhat different. It is only the second school in the province that I've come across where employees also note the activities of their resident ghost. Considering my initial lead to this well-documented Alberta ghost story, I wasn't too surprised by its widespread acceptance. My introduction to the tale occurred while I spent a busy Saturday afternoon signing books in front of a large bookstore in West Edmonton Mall. The city was hosting a world-class figure skating event that weekend, and so the mall was crowded with tourists from all over, and many people stopped by to chat. One of those was a lady who didn't leave her name, but did leave her work phone number, and the enticing message that the school where she worked is haunted by a very special ghost. My initial phone call of inquiry was greeted not only with confirmation of the ghost's existence, but also with further information that we have his picture hanging above the door. The school's administrative assistant then went on to tell me that the ghost is the spirit of Ernest Stevenson, a former caretaker at the school. Everyone called him Stevie. He was a great friend to the children, the woman explained. He lived on the third floor of the school. From the stories around Hillhurst, it sounds as though at least a part of Stevie is still in residence there. I spoke with custodian Doug Wolf at the school. He explained although he's never had a direct experience with the ghost, he has certainly talked to others who have. We have swinging doors at the tops of the stairwells. Sometimes when no one's near the doors, they just start to move as though someone's gone through them. One time a man came to work at school first thing in the morning and he brought his son. He had the boy wait inside the school while he attended to something outside. I can't remember what it was. Maybe he had to shovel a bit of snow. When he came back in, the little boy was as white as a ghost. The child had seen a man. The child's father knew that there couldn't be anyone else in the school, but he had worked there for some time and he knew the stories about Stevie continuing to roam these hollowed halls of learning. He wasn't surprised, therefore, to see the set of swinging doors nearest to where his son was standing, moving back and forth, apparently of their own accord. He said that they really were swinging, not just moving a little bit, but swinging as though someone had just gone through them. I believe this occurred during a period of time when they'd taken the ghost pictures down from the school hallway. I understand a lot of things happened then. The everyday acceptance of beloved Stevie as a continuing presence at Hillhurst School is evidenced by a notation that Doug remembers reading in the logbook. The fellow worker merely stated, "Saw a ghost this morning." At a time when some schools on this continent are looking to increase security, how reassuring it is to know here in sunny Alberta at least one of our schools has its very own hall patrol. Organist's amazing experience. James Cornock had an amazing ghost story to tell, and the way he told it indicated an amazing attitude towards his experience. I wasn't scared, it was more a feeling of wonderment. Actually, it was a pretty neat experience. James is an organist at Notch Church in Calgary, and has been for 8 to 10 years. Until recently, though, he had no idea the place was haunted. It was very odd that day. In all his years with the church, the subject of ghosts or hauntings had never come up, even though James spoke frequently with other staff members, especially the church secretary, Jeannie, who had worked there for 30 years. One day, I was at the pipe organ practicing. I was the only person in the sanctuary. James explained that there was a wall of oak paneling behind him with roughly a 15-centimeter space between the panels. As he concentrated on learning the piece, James had become aware that he was no longer alone. Someone or something had joined him. It had come through the gap in the paneling. He knew immediately that whatever it was couldn't be human, as no person could have slipped through such a small opening. Despite this realization, he knew that a presence had joined him. Something came up behind me. It passed behind me. There was a presence there. There was a shape there, and the air was heavier. It looked at the sheet music, then it kept going. It nonchalantly exited by the choir exit behind the console. I wasn't afraid, more shocked. James' description of the apparition was amazingly detailed. He described a 1.8 meter tall man in his late 60s. He was really opaque, faint. There was a mask there, though, because I did feel it. Despite the decidedly unusual experience, James continued to practice session as planned. I kept playing for about half an hour, and then went to turn the key in to the church secretary. The interaction with the woman he'd known for the better part of 10 years puzzled him as much as the form passing through the sanctuary had. Jeannie and I had never brought this subject up before, but on that day she asked me, "Have you ever seen a ghost here?" Astounded that she would pick this particular day to ask such a question, James described the present he'd just witnessed. The woman was not surprised. Apparently the spirit whose presence James had felt is only one of the 2 ghosts who make their home in the church. The concept of a haunted church is certainly not unique to this one in Calgary. For example, there's a multitude of ghost stories surrounding the old abbeys and cathedrals in the British Isles. The oddity of the story is the coincidence that Jeannie's direct question concerning a never-before-discussed topic immediately after James' first ever experience. Perhaps now, given James' positive attitude toward his first encounter, and his and Jeannie's shared awareness of the specters in their church, the spirits will make themselves felt more often. An encounter with Charlie Dupre. I have no idea how Marcella Robe came to know my mailing address. I'm just glad she did, or I might never have heard the story about the ghost of Charlie Dupre. Marcella was heading for Vernon, British Columbia, but missed the bus that would have taken her there from Ghost Lake. I stood chilled to the bone, remembering that it was 8 o'clock in the evening and that her clothes, which might have been suitable during the day, were inadequate protection against the evening chill. For 2 hours the woman waited in vain for someone to give her a ride. Discouraged, Marcella then gave up and made her way to a motel complex she spotted not far from the highway. She reported that as she walked towards the building, a man shuffled past her. She spoke to the man, asking for information about where the highway buses stopped. He didn't answer her, but just kept walking towards the gas bar section of the establishment. Perhaps thinking that the stranger hadn't seen or heard her, Marcella tried to catch up to the man, but her legs were so cold that she suspects she wasn't moving as quickly as she would have liked to. Despite her slowness, she and the man reached the door of the motel lobby at the same time. "Please, could you tell me the bus schedule?" she asked for a second time, sensing that all was not well with the man. Marcella probed further. "What is your name?" According to Marcella, the figure's answer came in a ghostly tremble and consisted of 2 words. The first word, Charlie, was clear. The word that followed wasn't as clear, although the woman remembers hearing dupe something. Then the figure walked past her and into the kitchen area. She noted at the time that no one in the dining room or kitchen area so much as looked up when the man walked through. Marcella, however, was more concerned with her own travel arrangements, as there was a motel employee in the lobby. Marcella explained her predicament and asked for directions. She assumed that the man, now in the kitchen, who gave his name as Charlie, was also a lost traveler. She asked the desk clerk if he too had made inquiries. "What man?" came the puzzled reply. "Why, the man who just walked through here into the kitchen. Didn't you see that man walk by?" she asked incredulously. "No," he responded, with a tone of finality that didn't invite further questions. Marcella used the facilities at the hotel to arrange a ride to Vernon and to contact her relatives, letting them know she'd been delayed and that they shouldn't worry. She didn't, however, mention her strange encounter with a man only she appeared to be able to see. I could not even explain being stranded, never mind an encounter with the ghost," she exclaimed. The Gnome. On a November evening in the late 1930s, Mary Bruce drove a buggy and a team of horses from the village of Glenavis to her family's farm. A naturally happy youngster, Mary entertained herself by singing Red River Valley as she made her way towards the warmth of home. As I approached the last leg of the drive, which meant going down a slight hill and up another before turning into our driveway, I saw a small figure coming toward me. I didn't pay too much attention to the figure, as I was sure it was my kid sister coming to meet me. She went on to remark that not only was the figure about the same size as her sister, but it looked to be wearing a parka with a hood like her sister's, and to be carrying a flashlight, possibly to guide Mary through the last bit of her journey. I became alarmed when the horses started to shy away and headed to the side of the road. The figure and I reached the hollow between the two hills at the same time. I tried to rein the horses to stop, but they wouldn't. I still thought it was my sister as the figure came even with the buggy. I looked down from the seat. It put its hands over the flashlight, and I could see the red light shining between its fingers. Then it disappeared. Both Mary and the horses were badly shaken by the sighting, and so they covered the last half-kilometer to home in record time. Dad wasn't pleased with me driving the horses so hard, but I leapt off the buggy and ran into the house to find my kid sister at the kitchen table doing her homework. The next day I went out to the hollow to see if there were any tracks in the dust. There were none. The following Sunday, Mary visited one of her friends, the local school teacher. The two loved to frighten one another with scary tales, but in this case, Mary swore to herself that she wouldn't tell her friend of the experience in the hollow. Clearly, her friend hadn't made the same oath, for she had a strange tale to tell Mary. As she was making coffee, she told me that the previous Thursday, as she came home from the neighbors, she saw a small child standing on the doorstep of the teacherage. Then it vanished. My hair stood on end. Thursday was when I saw my apparition, Mary recalled. They compared experiences and found them identical. They decided never again to tell stories of the unexplained. Truckers hear screams. Almost exactly halfway between Calgary and Canmore, along the Trans-Canada Highway, at a spot known as Scott Lake Hill, there used to be a service station. It was set back a bit from the roadway, and behind the station there was a neat little story-and-a-half house where the owners lived. Tough economic times closed the business a few years ago, and the shell of a building that had been the garage was demolished. The service road to and from the highway remained, however, as did the crumbling ruins of the house. Long-distance truck drivers used to like to stop there to catch a few hours' sleep. The situation was ideal. A good large pad of cement that was far enough off the road to be safe from oncoming traffic, and yet not so far that the drivers would have to waste valuable time getting back to their route once they were rested. Even the location was ideal for a rest stop. Having cleared Calgary, westbound drivers knew that most of the traffic congestion was behind them and that they had a good few kilometers to go before they were faced with the challenges of the mountain roads. Word spread quickly among the drivers, and soon the site of the former garage became a popular, if unofficial, truck stop. This popularity, however, didn't last long. One after another, the truckers who found the quiet lay-by stopped using it. A resident of Canmore explained that most of the truckers who stopped there only did so once. Rumor had it that there'd been a rape on that property. The truckers said that as soon as they drifted off to sleep, they'd be aroused by sounds of a woman's screams. The driver would immediately jump out of their rigs and look around for the person in distress, but there was never anyone there. Before long, it was commonly accepted that the place was haunted. No one pulls off the road there anymore. Ghostly greeting. The man who had the bewildering experience described in the story initially indicated he would be willing to talk to me about it in greater detail. By the time I called him, however, he'd apparently changed his mind. While his change of attitude was undeniably disappointing to me, it was also understandable, considering the bizarre nature of the tale. In northwestern Alberta, a maintenance worker was going about his rounds through the hallways of a school. He noticed a priest walking towards him. As the two passed each other, they exchanged greetings. In the course of his duties, the worker made his way to the school office. After dealing with other matters, he inquired about who the priest was with whom he had spoken earlier. The secretary had no idea who the man was referring to. There had been no visitors to the school that day. The puzzled worker went on to discuss other matters at hand, when a photograph on the wall caught his eye. It was a picture of the priest he'd spoken to in the school hall. Hoping to prove his point that there had been a visitor to the school that day, he pointed out the man in the photograph to the office staff. He was informed that he couldn't possibly have seen that particular priest. The worker began to argue that he was sure of what he had seen, but he was interrupted and informed that the priest in the picture had been dead for many years. The church that wouldn't be photographed. Margaret Smith, an insurance adjuster in Calgary, had a strange tale to tell. While it's not strictly a ghost story, it's certainly as mystifying as one. A vehicle collision had occurred in a back lane. As part of her investigation, Margaret was required to shoot photographs of the scene. The accident had happened at a T intersection in an alley. There was a church at the top end of the T. I took shots of all three sides. She was using an instant processing camera and film, so she merely laid each shot on the seat of the car to finish developing as she went on to the next photo. I thought I was through, but when I checked the pictures, only 2 had developed. The third one, the one of the church at the top of the T, was blank. I figured that particular frame of the film was defective, so I took another shot and waited for it to develop. It didn't develop either. Not wanting to waste time, Margaret changed the entire roll of film and took another picture of the church. That one was blank too, Margaret said. The young woman left the site without ever having completely accomplished her purpose. It seemed as though the church simply did not want its picture taken.